Good morning, everyone. This is Craig Anderson, Director of IHSA, and I appreciate all of you joining us today for this webinar on our IHSA Basketball State Series restructuring proposal. We'll get into some details of how this came about and then specifically talk about what kind of restructuring we're talking about and share with you some of our thoughts. And then as a result of this, we're really looking for feedback from you about a couple different proposals we're going to look at. The proposal is generally similar with a slight modification in the state final, but just to share with all of you, this is being recorded, and we are recording your chat with us so that as questions come up, we will try to address those today, but we can take those with us to try to clarify further if we don't have your questions today. So there is a chat session that's available here. As you may see on the attendee list, Kurt Gibson, our administrator for boys basketball, is with us. Kurt may chime in regards to some of the chat, as well as just some comments as we work through this. So let's get started with kind of some background information related to the proposal. So it was a little over a year ago that our board of directors kind of charged our staff with looking at ways that we might rejuvenate and possibly restructure the state final series in basketball. And so as a staff, we've been looking at a number of possible options, modifications of the state finals as well as with the state series. And so one of the things that we continue to hear feedback about was, and as it's been well known that we've seen attendance drop over the last several years at our basketball state tournaments. And so part of that discussion centered around a possible remedy of being able to finish our basketball state tournaments in advance of the NCAA men's basketball tournament opening weekend. And so the proposal you're going to see today has that in place, and we'll talk more about the weeks and when these all fall in line based on our current model. So based upon that feedback and some others, we did develop a model that would conduct all 4 classes of our girls' championships on one weekend and the boys' state championship games and state series, state finals on the following weekend. So in other words, we're taking what currently is 4 championship weekends and reducing that to 2 weekends of state final tournaments. So the current venue agreements that we have with our girls tournament here in Bloomington Normal and the boys tournament in Peoria runs through next school year, 1920. So we have one more season for sure of the current structure of 4 weekends of state finals as we've known it for many years. So understand that the information you're receiving today is for the possibility of changes to our state tournament series for the 2021 school year. And so coming up this spring and into moving into the summer, it is our anticipation that we will prepare a request for a proposal, RFP, to go out to whomever in Illinois, those sites that would have an interest in bidding on our state finals. And so as a result of that, by our anticipated June board meeting, will likely come to a recommendation for our board to consider related to the structure of the tournament. And that's why your feedback is critical to us in advance of that June board meeting. So again, this is being recorded, and for those that are unable to participate today or couldn't participate in our webinar on Tuesday, we'll be emailing everyone again with the recording of the webinar and with a location in the school center of which we're going to request feedback on the proposals you're going to see today and additional discussion items that we may not have been considered that we maybe should consider in looking at modifications to the basketball structure. So look for that coming early next week. And again, We're going to request this information back and likely take a decision to the June board meeting. So in addition, it allows us some time together to talk more about this, possibly at the IADA conference that's held in early May. And so look forward to more discussion about it at that time. So here we go with the proposal. As mentioned, we're combining all four tournaments, all four tournaments per gender into basically corresponding dates. And so I'll talk a little bit about the weeks, and if you're not familiar to those, we would consider and likely have a modification in our quarterfinal games, moving to a Saturday and allowing those games to be held at the higher seeded team in advance of the start of our regional semifinal games. Again, looking at our girls regional tournaments, then starting in week 33, Saturday of week 32, following weeks 33. And then as we currently do, allowing our host schools to determine the finals date for the girls tournament, either a Thursday or a Friday. So it compacts, again, all four classes within that schedule. In the next week, which would be our girls sectional week, week 34, we would have the girls tournament games on Tuesday and Thursday. So doubleheader semifinal games, if the facility would allow for it, on that Tuesday, with the championship games on Thursday. The same week, our boys tournament would begin. So Saturday of week 33, the quarterfinal games, again, similar to the girls tournament, higher seeded team would host that quarterfinal game. And then again, where facilities would allow us to host a doubleheader semifinal regional games in Wednesday of week 34, and then the championships on Friday of week 34. And for the, as you can see there, trying to avoid the overlap of girls teams participating in the sectional competing on the same nights that the boys regional teams would be competing. So obviously in hopes of allowing fans to be able to attend both contests in a particular week, a girls sectional along with the boys regional. So that's the initial part of the tournament. And as we move into the later portions of the tournament now, we would be in week 35, the week of our girls super sectional and state finals. Anticipate the super sectional to be played on that Monday of week 35. And then obviously as we put all this state final games into one weekend, it requires us to now start our tournament games on Thursday. And again, I'll in the next slide talk about more structure related to the state finals. So I'll just share that obviously the girls tournament would conclude there in week 35 with the anticipation that all four championship games would be played in back-to-back nature. We'd split them into two sessions simply for crowds. And again, we'll talk about that. But in that corresponding week of the girls super sectional and state final, our boys sectional tournament would be going on. So semifinal games could be double headers where facilities allowed, but the Tuesday, Wednesday semifinal games followed by the Friday boys sectional championship game. So as you'll see over in number 4 there on the side to where we're talking about changes, or the conflict of the only conflict we would have other than if weather could create conflicts, of course, during this time of year. But those Friday semifinal games could overlap with the same 3A, 4A teams on the boys' side competing in a championship sectional. So we could have split crowds for those girls teams that qualify for state in 3A, 4A, and then are competing on the boys' side in the sectional championship on that Friday night. As it's noted in the change there, number 5, just so you can get some corresponding weeks with our current schedule. Week 35 is the current girls basketball class 3A, 4A weekend, and week 36 is the current boys basketball Class 1A, 2A weekend. So it moves the 1A, 2 girls postseason a week later and moves the 3A, 4A boys start of their state series a week earlier, with regionals now corresponding with what is currently our 1A, 2A state series. So let's take a look at the state finals, and we're going to actually look at two different models. I'm going to call this model the 4-6-6 model because it's going to have a model of state final contests where we would play 4 games on Thursday, 6 games on Friday, and then 6 games on Saturday. So you can see there the schedule would have some afternoon games for our 1A semifinals, evening 2A semifinal games. Would come back on Friday morning and play the consolation games for both 1A and 2A. And then in the afternoon and evening, hit the 3A semifinals, followed by the 4A semifinals. Come back on Saturday morning with the third place games for both 3A and 4A. And then again, as noted, coming back with the 4 straight championship games divided into 2 separate sessions. So we like the idea of this model having what you could call maybe our prime time games. The semifinal games have an afternoon and evening sessions. It does still allow us to have consolation games be played as a staff. When we talked about it, we believe that's still important to our member schools to have the opportunity to play guaranteed 2 games when they come to state. And it also allows for those games to have the same venue. Part of our conversation as we've looked at different models and talked to people have wondered about where we might host the state finals, if there were facilities space in reasonable location, if because of the tight time schedule this kind of proposal might create, that if we would move the consolation games off-site of where our semifinal and final games are. And as a staff, we generally believe that's not a good move. We believe it's best to stay in the same site. And we're open to thoughts on that thought that we have. If others have a different opinion, we're open to that. But the final there, number 4, and the reason for our next model we're going to look at as we looked at and considered those 6 games on Saturday, all of which are going to require at the conclusion of the game an award ceremony. We're fearful of, as things can happen in basketball, injuries or overtimes, that we're really holding ourselves to a really tight time schedule there. So in the first webinar, I'll just share with you that there was a concern about the 9 o'clock, that early of a morning start time with the game. And again, if others have that concern, we're interested in hearing about that. So let me move to our last model of a state final weekend. This we're calling our 6-6-4 model because the model would have us playing 6 games on Thursday, 6 games on Friday, and then 4 games on Saturday. And so starting in the morning on Thursday to get 6 games in, then we would have 1A followed by 2A semifinals, and then move into the evening with the consolation games for the 1A and 2A. And then Friday move into morning and afternoon semifinal games, followed by their consolation games in the evening, and then would allow us to have the 4 championship games again in 2 sessions on Saturday, but gives us the freedom of awards being able to be divided up and have the freedom of more time on that Saturday for the celebration of championship games. So that's the 2 models. I'll share with you, and it is obvious as you look at it, that this model does require the teams that lose in the semifinal to play 2 games in 1 day. And again, we're open to the opinions of our member schools, you in particular, in regards to that, if that's something we shouldn't consider, or if based upon the awards, this model makes sense. So again, this model, like the previous model, would allow us to keep all games, consolation, semifinal, and championship games in the same venue as previously noted. So just a couple additional thoughts, and then I'll take some time to maybe look at some of your chat questions, and we can respond to those. If things are coming to mind, I'm going to, take the next 10 or however long it takes, 10 to 15 minutes to maybe respond to some of your questions that might come in through chat if you want to start typing those in. So as noted, and I talked previously, we believe the feedback we have from schools and coaches that the consolation games still remain important. And as a result, we made them part of both proposals. We believe that they should be played in the same venue as noted. All of this obviously is still in the discussion stage. We first introduced it to our board of directors at their February board meeting. And then since that time, have had discussions with others. An obvious group that we're going to spend some time with this is the Basketball Advisory Committee that will be meeting here at the end of April. And so their opinions will be very important to us. So Kurt and Beth did a basketball webinar that for coaches earlier this week that shared some of the same information. So we'll be reviewing that. And again, as noted, we value your feedback. So let's just jump over to some of your chat questions. And obviously, we won't identify who submitted these, but we'll take a look at these. So we had a question about will any of our members who choose to get a view of this PowerPoint? And I think the fact that we're going to make a link to the webinar available to you, I think that should suffice. If you would like just the PowerPoint itself, you can send an email to Kurt or myself. We'd be happy to forward that on to you. But for sure, the link to the slides that would include the webinar and the conversation would also be available to everyone.
Yeah. Craig, I'll just jump in real quick. Yeah, once we know, we posted that here in the webinar today, but I'll just tell everybody again, once we know exactly where the presentation is going to be housed on our website, we'll at a minimum put a note in the school center to let everybody know where that's at. You mentioned we'll include in that note how people can also go and offer some written feedback in addition to any calls or whatever that they might want to send us. And then finally, I just very informally, asked if people had any thoughts on the consolation games. Use the emojis, little thumbs up, thumbs down, because that was one of the things that the staff did have considerable discussion about over the past year about those games. And as Craig's mentioned, at this point, we've landed on this idea that they are important. And we also believe that, as I think Craig mentioned, they need to be played. If we're going to play them, they need the same kind of, attention and exposure by playing them in the championship arena as opposed to some kind of offsite facility. So I know we're getting a lot more questions, so I'll let you dive into some of those, Craig, and we'll try to help with some written answers as well as we can.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Kurt. We've had a couple comments, and I'm just going to reference the questions. So we had a question come in: would 1A and 2A game times be switched in alternate years for either model? Same for 3A, 4A. And I guess at this point, we've had in our history, we've had times of where we've modified from one year to the next a schedule, whether it be game times or class order. And we would, recognizing that this is a significant change, we're not opposed to, and we generally lean on the Basketball Advisory Committee for that recommendation if it makes sense because of the significant differences. And obviously, either one of these models has a significant difference in that if we take it how we proposed it, the 1A, 2A teams, whether you call it a benefit or punishment, I guess depends on your perspective of a day off before you return if you're in the championship game to play. And so if the again, if our membership, in particular our basketball advisory committee, recommends the thought that modifying or changing those, whether it be game time order or classification order, to give schools from one year to the next the opportunity to be on both sides of that, we're definitely open to that. So I think that's something that could have more discussion. Question came in: are there concerns about how hotels will charge schools if they are eliminated early, so they can go home and not be charged for the rooms? And in response to that, I think depending upon the model we land on, if in fact, let's just talk about the second model, the 4-6-6 model. If there's the potential for a team that loses during the day and is going to come back and play their final game of the weekend on the same day, that I believe we would work with the hotels to allow for some provisions of establishing what they're going to be choose to do. So in other words, maintain a block of rooms that upon the outcome of the game, a school could slide into that block of rooms that we have held for a school to resume a hotel room, because now they have to stay for the duration of the tournament, or vice versa. They won't no longer need their rooms because they're finished with the tournament. So it would be my position that we would, through the RFP, make sure that those provisions are established, and whoever's agreeing to bid on our proposal would be able to work with us on that. So that's a very good question, and something we had thought about and would hope to have in place. Question came in: will the 1A, 2A girls have an extra week of regular season games? And will the 1A, 2A boys have one less week of the regular season games? So the way this plays out, the 1A, 2A girls would have one additional week of regular season games. The 1A, 2A boys would actually have the same number of regular season games, but it would be the 3A, 4A boys that would have 1 week less of regular season games because their tournament, their state finals are finishing one weekend before when they currently finish. And obviously the 1A, 2A girls are ending one weekend after where they currently finish. So those are the two classes of teams that would have modified weeks of the regular season. So a question came in and related to a practice session for teams at the state final. And that is one thing that we've, as a staff, with either one of these models, have had a difficult time of determining when that might happen. So if you take the models as we have presented them, for the 3A, 4A teams that wouldn't play until the second day of the tournament, I think it would be lofty to expect us to have those teams come in on Wednesday for a practice day, stay, that's an additional hotel night that we really wouldn't anticipate. So a practice day in the arena on Wednesday I think is unlikely, but I think the proposal has the possibility of eliminating those what we know now as those half-hour practice opportunities that exist in the arena under our current model for both the girls and the boys tournament. So it's yet to be a piece that we, looking at these two proposals, think that would be fair for all of our participating schools. That's, we're bringing 16 schools, and to try to find times that don't overlap with competition dates and times right now seems a little bit difficult. So in looking at the model, if any of you have suggestions about where that might fit in, we'd be open to that. In addition, those who have been to our boys or girls state finals know that we have a banquet typically the day before the championships begin. And again, because of the staggered start times by days of classes of teams competing, we haven't determined where that banquet fits in as well. So thoughts or ideas on that, we welcome your feedback.
Craig, a couple of other questions came in. One regarding scheduling of regular season games. An attendee asked, and made the correct assertion that the regional quarterfinal games, particularly for the boys, well, I guess, and for the girls, would begin the day after what might be considered the final Friday of the regular season. And I guess the real key there is in any kind of restructuring, certainly there's going to be some changing in how folks schedule games. But yes, that is how that part of the presentation should have been interpreted. And then there was another question that came in about the 3-point contest, and are there still thoughts to continue that? And the answer to that question is certainly we intend to continue the 3-point contest. However, it could result in a slightly different format, and by that I mean there could be an added round of shooting included at the super sectional level, so there could be fewer shooters brought to the state finals, but certainly we'll find time to make sure we get that that competition taken care of.
Yeah. Okay. A couple more questions have come in. Questions about are there any concerns with the TV contracts for the events? And generally, I think the TV groups that we work with and how those contracts are formed, that we generally have some flexibility with those. You know, the airtime and now having so many games in a particular day, we'd have to work closely with those who we join in the venture of them hosting our events on TV. But we think that we can still get the majority of them, and if we're limited because of some overlap of times when the particular network that we're using has some limits, that there may be some varied times of maybe not be live, but would be postponed and shown at a separate time. So again, something definitely we have to consider. Question came in about the shortage of officials. With the shortage of officials, do you foresee issues finding officials to cover postseason games for classes 1A through 4A now that they will coincide? And again, that is something we definitely have talked about. We do believe as a staff that there are enough certified officials to cover the games that we would have in a regional and then the sectional overlapping. You know, if we're able to keep all those games, boys and girls, so that they don't overlap for the most part, allows us the flexibility of using officials for both boys and girls, which helps that. But definitely something we're looking at and considering. Obviously, with more games, you know, there won't be as experienced officials on all games, but you know, those would be ventured out and try to matched up so that the younger or more inexperienced officials will be matched up with the more veteran officials and so on. But we do think there's definitely enough certified officials to cover, but there's likely, obviously, the possibility of seeing different faces than maybe folks are ordinarily used to seeing. Yeah, Kurt has hit on a number of these about 3-point. A note came in about the possibility of 2 different banquets, and we've talked about that. 1A, 2A schools, a possibility on Wednesday, and 3A, 4A on Thursday. Obviously, it would split some staff from attending a game versus attending a banquet. But again, you know, generally at our basketball tournaments, we have a lot of hands on deck and could make that happen. A comment here about somebody who's been to the tournament. I presume that the practice of having hosts for each qualifying team would continue, and they would help arrange practice facilities, and believe that definitely to be the case. If you were in a particular area, and while you may not get practice time in the facility, there would be other facilities within the area, high schools, college facilities, that definitely would be possibilities that folks would help our schools that are from out of the area find a location to have practices.
Craig, a question came in. Maybe you can address this. The question asks whether or not with the in these proposals with the regional quarterfinals potentially being played at the site of the higher team, what change might that bring about in terms of the hosting guarantee? Could that translate? I mean, I know that's I'll let you answer that, but how does that maybe impact who's hosting the quarterfinal game, who's hosting the remaining games?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, the current model like this that we have for baseball and softball, um, we allow the quarterfinal games to be run independently, meaning any gate just we cover the cost of the officials, in that case umpires, and you know if the school chooses to take a gate, they receive it as their guarantee, or not really a guarantee, but as monies they get for hosting. With basketball, we'd have to look at that very carefully and consider a model of if we're going to do a revenue share of the gate for our regional games. Again, working with the basketball advisory committee, we'd have to look at current host guarantee, but I think there is a potential of a restructuring of that host school guarantee if no longer are schools hosting the quarterfinal games. And so that would have to be vetted through the advisory committee and then with our board to what makes sense for our member schools who are hosting and that responsibility, and in addition to the association. Had a question come in about the thought of 1A, 2A boys and girls, same site, same weekend, and then 3A, 4A boys and girls a separate weekend. And absolutely, we considered that, and we've had schools comment about that. We would be curious about the thoughts of our membership about that internally as a staff. When we talked about it, we thought and the reason we went with the model we did is we simply thought that made more sense for our membership, since would be less of a significant change for the boys and the girls in terms of their regular season versus postseason. But if we would modify to that type of schedule, then I think we'd have to look at our bylaw for the start of the season, where the girls start a week earlier than the boys. So that would have to be adjusted in the same way if we're going to have boys and girls ending on the same weekend at the end of the season. So more discussion to be had on that, but curious if you have thoughts on that. We would want you to share those with us for sure. Okay, I got a comment and then a question. A comment I've heard from teams that have gone to the state finals is that the IHSA keeps you pretty busy when you are at state. Do you think that will change significantly with this proposal? I can see the benefits of keeping them busy. I guess, yeah, it changes significantly for those who play on Thursday, don't play at all on Friday, and then will come back on Saturday for their championship. Definitely those teams would find more freedom of their time as they're here for a day without a contest. So while there'll be games to watch, if the teams wanted to come watch, that's something that locally schools would have to kind of determine what their plans are for that kind of day off. For the teams that are, depending upon the model, that are consolation, end up losing their first game, I think they have a generally quick turnaround in both proposals. And in the first proposal, you'll be playing, afternoon and evening, and following morning they'll be playing a game and then be done with their tournament. Or in the second model, the 6-6-4 model, teams will be playing the same day, and then it's they're quickly finished after that. So appreciate your comments and questions. Again, we're going to copy these and maintain these, and definitely take a look at these. Please look forward to the ability to view this again in the link that we'll be providing you via email next week, and then to enter into the school center area where we're creating a space for us to hear from you. And that's the reason we're doing this through the school center, is we really want to hear from our membership about these proposals. obviously the public and the media will have some thoughts, and it's more important for us to hear from our membership, because the last thing we want to do is create an experience that's not valuable and impressionable for the young people and the coaches that come and participate in our state finals in particular, but the state series in general. So we want your opinions on this, because the last thing we want to do is create something that's not in the best interest of the young people who will come and participate. So again, appreciate many of you who took time out of your day to join us. Again, we will have further discussion. As I mentioned, this will be a topic for me at the IADA conference when we talk, and we'll look for feedback there, as well as for you to do so through the school center area. So I'll pause here just another second. And if other questions come in, we can reference those, or if you have to be on your way, totally understood. But we will pause and wait just a few minutes before we shut it down. I got a comment from somebody here with us that asked, have you considered an off-site event the night before, like the NCAA? And it may just be part of my ignorance of the NCAA tournament, that I'm not familiar with that. So any more information you could share via email, or when we get this area, I'd be happy to look at that. But I'm just not sure I understand that question and what happens with the NCAA tournament. And finally, obviously, we listed our emails here because we always value any information you can share with us. If if you have immediate thoughts, shoot them to an email to us. I know most of you know how to get a hold of us via email, but we're welcome to gather that information. So again, just to finalize everything, we appreciate your time and taking this time to be with us and to hear this information. We look forward to corresponding about this as we move forward. Thank you.